This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can find all the cards in this video in their store by using the links in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Today we're going to take a look at the Domain mechanic. Domain made its debut in the year 2000's Invasion block, although it wasn't keyworded just yet, but in today's Oracle text, these cards all have Domain. A card with Domain has some type of effect that checks the number of basic land types among lands you control. In other words, it incentivizes you for playing 5 colors because the cards get more powerful the more basic land types you have. Domain didn't get keyworded until 2009's Conflux. Both Conflux and Invasion were sets with a heavy multicolored theme, and that's generally where we see Domain, since those sets are constructed for you to take advantage of it. Most recently, it made a return in 2022's Dominaria United. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have Domain. There were 57 cards eligible, and in this video we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, this includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like Regional Championships. Alright, let's look at the top 10 cards with Domain. At number 10, I've got 2 cards, Gaia's Might and Might of Alara. Gaia's Might would have made the list, but Might of Alara actually fell 1 point short, but I figured I may as well talk about both of them, and that's because they are functionally identical. For 1 green mana, they're both instants that give a creature +1/+1 until end of turn for each basic land type among lands you control. They had to go with a different name for the card in Alara because Gaia is a character from Dominaria, but by including Might in the name, they are making it pretty clear that these two cards are related. Anyhow, this has the potential to be a more efficient version of Giant Growth, and that's a pretty nice thing to have. Gaia's Might was played in extended Domain Zoo decks, in other words, 5-color aggro, and in 2023 it achieved a top 8 in a modern 5-color aggro deck. Gaia's Might is also in Standard right now because it got a reprint in Dominaria United, but it's much harder to build a 5-color aggro deck in Standard, so it may never gain any points there. Might of Alara also found success in a later extended 5-color aggro deck, and it's been played in modern 5-color aggro too. Both of these are likely to gain points in the future due to the rise of 5-color decks in modern. At number 9, it's Sphinx of the Clear Skies. This 5/5 flyer costs 3 generic and 2 blue, comes with Ward 2, and when it hits a player you get a domain-based version of Factor Fiction. In other words, you reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control, and your opponent divides those into 2 piles. You choose a pile to put into your hand, and the other goes to the graveyard. So, in addition to being a big beater that can end the game in the sky, the Sphinx also just gives you a ton of card advantage, especially in 5-color decks, where the effect basically just is Factor Fiction. This makes the Sphinx pretty hard to beat if it's left alive, and Ward 2 makes it more challenging to kill than it would be otherwise. It's been played in 4 and 5-color control decks in Standard, Pioneer, and Alchemy, but it gained all of its points in 2022. It's not impossible for it to see some play in those formats in the future, but it doesn't seem super likely either. At number 8, it's Drag to the Bottom. For 2 generic and 2 black, Drag to the Bottom is a sorcery that gives the whole board -X/-X, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. If you're playing 4 or 5-color control, this is a pretty amazing board sweeper, as it can usually clear everything away the turn you play it, and because it gives -X/-X, it can even deal with creatures that are indestructible. It's no surprise then that Drag to the Bottom has gained all of its points in exactly that type of deck, putting up finishes in both Alchemy and Standard. It's likely to gain more points in the future. At number 7, it's Shadow Prophecy. For 2 generic and a black, this instant lets you look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. You put 2 of those in your hand and the rest in your graveyard, and you lose 2 life. If you can get your domain high enough, this is a pretty amazing card draw spell. If you're looking at the top 5 and picking 2 while also loading your graveyard, you're going to be in an amazing position. But even when you lower the number to 3, you're talking about the kind of card draw spell that often sees play in Standard anyway, but because this has a way higher ceiling, it's already seeing play in multiple formats. In addition to being featured in 5-color control decks in both Alchemy and Standard, it's also played in Reanimator and Indomitable Creativity decks in Modern, and it even has a single top 8 in a Legacy Grixis deck. It's very well positioned to gain more points in multiple formats, so it will be moving up this list in the future. At number 6, it's Nishoba Brawler. For 1 generic and a green, the Brawler is a star 3 with trample, and its power is equal to the number of basic land types among lands you control. This can be a very efficient creature in a deck with lots of dual or tri-lands. Its points have all come in modern domain aggro decks, which are packed full of exactly those types of lands, not to mention fetch lands, which can really make it easy for you to have a lot of basic land types in play, even in the extreme early game. The Brawler is likely to gain more points in Modern, although its vulnerability to Lightning Bolt keeps it from seeing even more play in the format. At number 6, it's Territorial Cavu. For a red and a green, it's a 2-2 with power and toughness equal to the number of basic land types you control, and when it attacks, you get one of 2 options. You can discard a card and draw a card, or you can exile a card from a graveyard. In other words, this has the potential to be a 2-mana 5/5 that can hate on your opponent's graveyard and or dig you deeper into your deck. The Cavu is from Modern Horizons 2, so the only 60-card paper formats it's legal in are Modern Legacy and Vintage. In those formats, it isn't that hard for it to be a 4/4 on turn 2, and that combined with that nice attack trigger has led to it seeing play in both Modern and Vintage. In Vintage, it's been played in Bug midrange, and in Modern, it helps spawn 5-color domain aggro decks. It's going to continue seeing play in Modern. At number 4, it's Herd Migration. For 6 generic and a green, this is a sorcery that makes you a 3/3 beast for each basic land type among lands you control. You can also pay 1 generic and a green and discard it to search your library for a basic land and put it into your hand and gain 3 life. This is a really nice design for domain decks because it's a great payoff that can spit out 5 3/3s, but it's also an enabler, since you can cycle it away early to help up your domain, and the life you gain can often help you make the game go long enough to play your domain payoffs. It's gained all of its points in Standard, where it's played as one of the main win conditions in the format's 5-color control decks. It's still got plenty of time left in Standard too, but the fact it hasn't seen success in any other formats doesn't bode well for its long-term future. At number 3, it's Scion of Draco. For 12 generic mana, the Scion is a 4/4 with flying, and it grants vigilance to your white creatures, hexproof to your blue creatures, lifelink to your black creatures, first strike to your red creatures, and trample to your green creatures. It also costs 2 less to cast for each basic land type among lands you control, so in theory you can end up paying 2 mana for this thing. If your board already has some creatures on it, the Scion is pretty likely to drastically improve your ability to attack the turn it comes down to. The Scion is a callback to a much older domain card that didn't quite make the list with only 4 points, Draco, but at least the Scion made it. This is a Modern Horizons 2 card, so the only 60-card formats it's legal in are Modern Legacy and Vintage. It's done a ton of work in Modern ever since being printed. Not only does it see play in 5-color domain aggro decks alongside Territorial Cavu, but it's also played in calibrated Blast decks. The Blast does damage to any target equal to the mana value of the top non-land card in your library, and obviously the Scion can do a huge chunk of damage. In addition to seeing play in those 2 decks really geared towards abusing the Scion, it also occasionally sees play in other 4 and 5 color decks as a singleton card. For example, it's sometimes played in Crash of Rhinos decks. Scion of Draco is in a great spot to keep gaining points in Modern. At number 2, it's Tribal Flames. For 1 generic and a red, it's a sorcery that does X damage to any target, where X is a number of basic land types among lands you control. That's right, you can pay 2 for 5 damage to anything, including players. While it was originally printed in Invasion, it didn't gain any points as a result of that printing. Instead, its successes have all come as a result of a time-shifted reprint in Time Spiral. This led to it finding success in 5-color aggro decks in Extended, and it also made it legal in Modern once that format was created. It's been played in 5-color zoo decks in Modern since day 1, and the recent printings of Nishoba Brawler and Territorial Cavu have helped make it a fairly important card in Modern over the last couple of years. It's going to keep gaining points in Modern, but it's unlikely that it ever passes a number 1 card on the list, which is Layline Binding. This one probably doesn't surprise anyone. For 5 generic and a white, it's an enchantment with flash, and it exiles a non-land permanent when it enters the battlefield until it leaves the battlefield. It costs 1 less to cast for each basic land types among lands you control, which means it can be cast as a single white mana removal spell. Since being printed in Dominaria United, it's become a heavily played card in every format apart from Vintage, and that's because it's now one of the best removal spells in the game. Sure, you need to set things up for it not to cost a ton of mana, but the cost of doing that just isn't very high. It's rapidly gaining points, and that's going to continue. So I don't really see any other card ever surpassing Layline Binding as the number 1 card with Domain. So those are the top 10 cards with Domain. If you're interested in playing a 5-color deck, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at mechanics, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.